In the Victorian era, finding enough to eat was very challenging. Without a reliable source for obtaining food, you would be in a constant struggle for survival. Though in a period without grocery stores, ordering online, or cell phones, what food could you eat in the Victorian era? In addition, what type of food could you even afford for survival, with millions of working class people struggling to avoid malnourishment and starvation? Near the start of the 19th century, it is estimated that 2/3 of England's population lived in poverty. At the end of the Victorian era, this figure was still very high, at over 25%. Only 1 or 2% of Victorian England belonged to the upper class, while 15% were in the middle classes, which means over 80% of people in Victorian England were in the working classes. The quality of food for them was poor and limited in terms of quantity. To have daily nourishment when money was always scarce, they used creativity, imagination, and all of their available resources. So, what food did Victorian working people eat to survive? Survival food for the Victorian working class. Porridge. This has been a common food staple in England for centuries. Whether it was known as fermenting in medieval times or similar concoctions, porridges of various kinds were served in Victorian working class households. In fact, it was only near the end of the Victorian era when prepared breakfast cereals began having some acceptance on British middle class breakfast tables. Gruel. When a family could not afford porridge, which were many, gruel was a basic substitute. It was made from boiled oatmeal thinned with water, sometimes flavored with treacle or spices when available. Pottages. This was a thick stew or soup which contained boiled grains and vegetables. When available, meat or fish would also be added to the ingredients. Even in medieval times, this was a food staple for the peasant class. Bread. This nourishment was the staple which powered many workers of the Victorian period in medieval times. Even the average middle-class family of 6 consumed 55 pounds per week, while using over half of their weekly income to purchase it. A laborer during the Victorian age would eat over 2 pounds of bread per day. For Victorian poor, it was a key food served at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, along with lard or drippings. If it could be afforded, cheese or butter would also be served with bread. Inexpensive vegetables. To complement their diets, working-class Victorians added cheap vegetables to their daily meals like cabbage and onions. Vegetables also provided nutrients they so desperately lacked. Leeks, watercress, carrots, peas, and turnips were also consumed, subject to seasonal availability. Affordable meats. Unlike medieval times, when meat was a luxury, most Victorians were able to eat meat at least once each week. Though the quality and kind of meat consumed by the working class was not the same as wealthy Victorians. For working class households, the cuts of meat purchased from their local butcher were inexpensive and of lower standards. An example would be the head of a sheep, which cost 3 pennies. Another kind of inexpensive meat available for the working class at their butcher was called broxy meat. Unfortunately, this was the meat of any animal that died from disease, usually sheep. Mutton. A favorite of Victorian England, this meat from sheep 3 years of age and older has fallen out of favor in modern times. It gave these households good nutritional value and flavorful taste. Calf's head. Yes, Victorians spared no part of a butchered animal in their pursuit of affordable meat. This food could be used in various recipes by either boiling or roasting after the time-consuming task of removing bones and skin. During this process, the brains and tongue would also be saved for consumption. Sheep trotter. A boiled sheep's foot, often sold by street vendors as a cheap takeaway food, though not much meat to savor. Fish. Many working-class Victorians would visit the fishmonger for an important part of their dietary needs. Cod, haddock, and herring were popular choices. It was a fresh and affordable option compared to the poor quality meat they would otherwise purchase. Jellied eels. Popular in London, these were cut up eels, boiled in water and vinegar with spices added. Once these contents were allowed to cool, they would congeal into a jellied substance. Though with the pollution of the River Thames, it became more difficult to find eels locally as the Victorian era progressed. Pickled oysters and whelks. Once again, these were a desired food item for many Victorians, though expensive to purchase fresh. So, for working class people, they would have to take chances by eating a less fresh product, which would be cheaper, though sometimes dangerous. A safer way to obtain these items on a budget was consuming pickled oysters or whelks. They also lasted longer because of their preservation method. Fruits. Locally grown apples, berries, pears, and plums, when in season, were an affordable option to complement working class diets in rural areas. Black treacle. This was an uncrystallized dark syrup made during the sugar refining process. It was like molasses and used on bread, some food dishes, and on its own. Drinks, soups, and broth for the Victorian working class. Weak tea and milk. These items were consumed when available and affordable. Using the same tea leaves repeatedly to save on costs resulted in a weaker flavor. One also had to watch out for watered down or adulterated milk. Rice milk pudding. Boiled rice and skim milk. 1 spoonful of sugar and allspice would be added after this mixture was heated. It was similar to a liquid rice pudding. Beer and ale. By 1865, British brewers made over 20 million barrels of beer each year. It was a staple for many households, though the alcohol content was typically less than 3%. With sources for drinking water in many places of questionable quality, especially in larger cities like London, small beer was considered a safe alternative. In addition, filth, sewage, and other potential contaminants made beer a reliable choice for quenching one's thirst. Brown soup. In the Victorian period, this consisted of brown gravy, dried fruit or vegetables, peppercorns, and malt vinegar, though there were a variety of other ingredients with which one made brown soup during this period. Bone broth. For poor Victorians, this was a simple, common staple for those with few resources. Leftover bones were boiled in water with the gelatin from the broth often used for desserts. Water sauci. A soup which was basically seafood water, as the name implies. Leftover seafood was put into a pot and boiled with water. Then spices would be added. If it could be afforded, parsley roots and wine would be tossed in for flavor. One had to be careful of fish bones when eating water sauci. Mock turtle soup. Turtle soup was a desired food in Victorian England. However, it was unaffordable for most because of the increasingly rare and expensive ingredient of turtle. Therefore, to make this meal affordable for many, mock turtle soup was created. In place of expensive turtle meat, substitutes such as calf's head and various organ meats were used for this dish. Stock, seasoning, and Madeira wine were added to the organ meats, which were formed into balls as turtle eggs. As one can see, there were no strict menus used by working-class Victorians for survival food. All that you ate depended on if you could afford it, if it was available, and what you were prepared to eat. This meant that for the vast majority of Victorian-era British, you could be eating a variety of foods just to gain your daily nourishment. As poverty rates improved and the selection of foods became more varied and accessible, increasing numbers of working-class Victorians began to enjoy better nourishment. Thank you for supporting us at VictoriantoModern. Please be sure to watch another episode shown at the end of this video. Also be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and click the notification button so we can create more exciting content. I wish you good tidings as we remember that sharing knowledge has been a noble deed throughout the ages.